and welcome to the Dynamic Duel podcast, a weekly show where we review superhero films and debate the superiority between Marvel and DC by comparing their characters in stat-based battle simulations. I'm Marvelous Joe.
And I'm his twin brother, Johnny DC.
And in this episode, we are going to review the 2007 film Spider-Man 3, starring Tobey Maguire. This is kind of a timely episode, just coming off of Spider-Man No Way Home, where we saw Tobey Maguire reprise the role in that movie.
Yeah, the movie's not good, but it's like even worse than I remember.
Yeah, actually, I rewatched it right before I saw No Way Home, and I'm like, oh my god, I can't get through this. I watched it again, and yeah, largely felt the same way, but we'll be talking all about the movie later on this episode. Before that, we're going to break down the comic book movie news from the past week, of which there was none.
So we're not going to do that.
There was no major superhero movie news, but we do have some things to say about the paywall that we had going on in the latter half of last year, so we're going to talk a little bit about that. As always, we list our segment times in our episode description, so feel free to check out the show notes if you want to skip ahead to a particular topic.
Yeah, if you're listening to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Podchaser, or any platform that allows it, please leave us a rating or review. You can also visit our website, dynamicduel.com, and leave a review there in our reviews section.
And with that out of the way,
quick, to the No Prize. A No Prize is an award that Marvel used to give out up until the 90s to fans. Our version, the Dynamic Duel No Prize, is a digital award that we post on social media that I personally draw for those who we feel gave the best answer to our question of the week. Last week's question tied into our first trailer for Moon Knight, which is premiering on Disney Plus in March. We asked, so far, what has been your favorite Marvel Disney Plus show or DC HBO Max show, and why? We got quite a few answers. We're going to give a list of our honorable mentions before announcing this week's winner. Our first honorable mention goes to Isaac Stone, who said,
all right, my name is Isaac Stone. Really enjoy your guys' podcast. I think my answer is Loki. I grew up watching Doctor Who, and Loki just feels like Doctor Who on steroids. I think it had an amazing budget. It's amazing quality. And I think acting, everything was so believable. And just like super enjoyed it, and look forward and hope that other content will be as thoughtfully produced as Loki was.
Yeah, of all of the Marvel Disney Plus shows, Loki was by far my favorite.
Oh yeah, and I awarded it my brother's award for Best Marvel Television Series last year. So I also was a fan. Like Isaac said, I don't think any of the other shows come close to matching the level of production that the Loki series had. Not only did the series look great, the performances were amazing. The story was like kind of groundbreaking when it comes to the Marvel Cinematic Universe continuity because it introduced the multiverse. It had a lot going for it.
It is essential viewing for the Marvel Cinematic Universe.
I'm really looking forward to the second season whenever that comes out. I don't think that's been announced yet. Our next honorable mention goes to Patrick, who said,
hey guys, Patrick here. Now, I don't know for sure if this counts because it's become only 4 episodes in, but HBO Max Peacemaker is my favorite. I did not know if John Cena was going to be able to carry a whole series by himself, but with James Gunn guiding a hand, it's been hilarious, and I've actually really enjoyed it. And now I'm actually starting to care about what's going to happen in the plot and the characters, so totally recommend it. Soundtrack is awesome.
Yeah, have you seen any of the Peacemaker episodes?
No, I haven't started watching it yet. I usually like to binge shows that we have to review, so that way they're like fresh in my mind.
Dude, this thing is so good so far. I'm loving it. It may be the best DC show that ends up being on HBO Max. We'll see how the show finishes out, but so far I'm really loving it.
You like it more than Doom Patrol?
I always thought one of the best things about Doom Patrol was how funny it was, in addition to its like zany ideas and plot lines and stuff like that. Peacemaker, in my opinion, just as funny and almost as crazy.
Well, then I guess I better start watching it sooner rather than later.
Yeah, anyone who's not watching it should definitely be watching it. It's great. Our final honorable mention goes to Matt Estes' son, Abram. He said,
hey guys, Matt Estes here, and I'm going to let my son Abram answer this question for us.
I chose Hawkeye because it inspired other people to do something of their choice.
Oh yeah, that was one of the aspects of the Hawkeye show that we really didn't discuss too much in the review, but the fact that they included a hero who is mostly deaf and a villain turned anti-hero in Echo, who is also deaf, who seemingly have handicaps but don't let it get to them and are still able to be super heroic, was a very inspiring message. You know, anybody could be a superhero if they just have the will and the training and probably the gadgets and maybe some superpowers.
And some money.
Than anybody, yeah. Thanks for the great answer, Abram. And special thank you to Chumnu, Jesse Roberts, Miggy Methangian, and Richard McGrew from the Retro Namapod podcast. They gave some great answers as well, including Doom Patrol and Young Justice. We're really glad you guys reached out to us via our website by clicking on the record button.
But the winner of this week's No Prize is Brandon Estergaard, who said,
Hey, what's up, guys? My favorite has to go to Watchmen. Fantastic story, and you can never go wrong with Regina King.
A short answer, but not an incorrect one. The Watchmen television series on HBO was, I think, far and away the best Marvel or DC television series so far.
which is really appropriate because the graphic novel is widely considered to be the best graphic novel ever written. It was award-winning, and the show was as well. It picked up 11 Emmys and a Peabody. There's no competition. It is hands down the best. If you haven't seen it, it's on HBO Max. I definitely recommend it.
But congrats again to Brandon Estergaard for winning this week's No Prize. If you, the listener, want a shot at winning your own No Prize, stay tuned to later on this episode when we'll be asking another question of the week. And now that that's done,
wait, there's no news. On to bigger and better things. I don't know. Something.
All right, for those of you who have been listening to us for a while, you know that last year, Apple Podcasts and Spotify unveiled a means for podcasters to monetize their shows through subscriptions. And Jonathan and I saw that, and we saw kind of like a paradigm shift within the podcast community where we thought a lot of people were going to be taking their shows behind a paywall in order to get earnings for the content they produce.
And that didn't really happen.
Yeah, it wasn't quite a paradigm shift so much as a dud.
At least for us.
At least for us. I really don't know of any of the shows. None of the shows that I listen to specifically ever chose to capitalize on this subscriptions idea. And it seems that for now, podcasts are mostly still monetizing through ads. When Jonathan and I took our show behind a paywall in August, we found that there was like zero audience growth between that time and the end of November when we released the paywall in order to help persuade you guys to donate to our annual charity fundraiser.
Which was really successful. And because of its success, we decided to extend the non-paywall through January.
And now that we're in February, we have decided to just eliminate the paywall altogether because of the audience growth reason, and because we really just miss sharing all these episodes with you, the audience. I remember when Eternals came out in November, and I was talking to some other fans after the show, and I wanted to direct them to our Cersei versus Firestorm episode so that they could learn more about Cersei and the Eternals in general. And I couldn't tell them to go listen to the episode because they'd have to pay to listen to it, you know? And no one wants to pay for a show that they've never even heard of. So I think just having the content out there makes me feel good as a content producer in talking about it with other people. And, you know, the whole reason Jonathan and I ever started this podcast was not to make money. We just thought we had the opportunity to. But, you know, push come to shove, we would rather gladly have the content out there than make you guys pay for it.
Right. Again, it's never been about money. It's just about really getting people to realize that DC is so much better than Marvel. And, you know, if I need the back catalog open to do that, then so be it.
You're not convincing anybody. But Jonathan and I started this podcast in 2016 on our 30th birthday. We just turned 36, holy crap, last week. And we're still having a ball doing it. We hope you guys enjoy listening to the show. And we hope you stick with us as we continue putting out more episodes for you guys. But yeah, that's the news.
Yeah, no more paywall. Yay!
And that brings us to our question of the week.
What's been your favorite episode so far of the podcast, and why?
Yeah, now I know we asked this question like a few years ago, but you know, we've had hundreds of episodes since then, so we're going to go ahead and ask it again. What's your favorite episode of the show? Be it a review episode, a duel, or an awards episode. We'd just like to know what it is and why.
Record your answer at dynamicduel.com by clicking on the red microphone button in the bottom right-hand corner, which will prompt you to leave us a voicemail. Your message can be up to 30 seconds long, and don't forget to leave your name in case we include you on the podcast. We'll pick our favorite answer and draw that person a Dynamic Duel No Prize that we will post to social media. Be sure to answer before February 5th.
And that does it for all the news for this episode, so let's go ahead and get into our main event, where we review the last film in the Sam Raimi Spider-Man trilogy, Spider-Man 3. Okay, Spider-Man 3. The movie was released in 2007 and directed by Sam Raimi, starring Tobey Maguire, Kirsten Dunst, James Franco, Thomas Hayden Church, and Topher Grace. The movie was the anticipated sequel to its beloved predecessor, Spider-Man 2. And much like the Dark Knight trilogy we reviewed a few weeks ago, the third installment of the franchise had the near impossible task of living up to the second one. But unlike The Dark Knight Rises, Spider-Man 3 is not good. If you haven't seen the film, just note that this is a spoiler review, like all of our reviews are. So if you haven't seen it, you know what? Consider yourself lucky and go ahead and continue listening if you want to save yourself the time as we discuss the movie's many plot points. And that was like the main issue of Spider-Man 3, right?
Way too many storylines, way too much stuff that they tried to cram into one movie.
Yeah, the story goes that the director Sam Raimi wanted to tell the story of Sandman and Harry Osborn because Raimi was a fan of Spider-Man's Silver and Bronze Ages. However, the head producer, Avi Arad, wanted to tell the story of Venom because he knew that's what fans wanted to see. And the studio, Sony Pictures, wanted to include elements like Gwen Stacy because Sony's just the fucking worst and thought they could suddenly start interfering with the director's vision. Got a little bit too big for their own britches and ruined everything. Because all these parties were tossing in their own ingredients into the metaphorical pot, Spider-Man 3 came out tasting like shit stew.
Yeah, don't forget that Sam Raimi also had to tie up, his running plot threads from previous films.
Exactly. Yeah, this movie had the heavy burden of not just introducing its own plethora of ideas, but also finishing up what came before. And I made a list of most, but certainly not all, of the plot lines covered in this film.
Oh, geez.
We saw Peter's own struggle with his ego. The film dealt with Peter and Mary Jane's rocky relationship, Peter and Harry's rocky friendship, Peter's new relationship with the public, Mary Jane's struggle with her career, Harry's revenge as the Green Goblin, Flint Marko and his sick daughter, the truth about Uncle Ben's murder, Eddie Brock's downfall, Venom and the symbiote, and we got love triangles in this movie not once, not twice, but thrice, including Peter, Mary Jane, and Gwen Stacy, Peter, Mary Jane, and Harry, and Peter, Gwen Stacy, and Eddie Brock. Wow. That is a lot of ground to cover in one film.
How did the studio not realize that this was going to be a horrible fucking train wreck?
Yeah, you think at some point someone would have stepped back and said, what the fuck are we doing? Like, this is 2 or 3 different movies. It's way too long, and the pacing is going to be all over the place, which it was. They should have cut like half of these ideas out, focused on making a good film that keeps the franchise strong, and then they could have re-upped the contracts for the talent and tried some of the cut ideas in a 4th movie. And it is likely that Sam Raimi did want to cut these ideas into 2 separate films and was probably just rejected and tried to do the best with what he had. But I don't want to give Sam Raimi too much credit because after all, it was still his decision to include Peter Parker's emo hairstyle and jazz club dance number in this movie. So he fucked up too.
Yeah, what the hell was he thinking with that? Like, as he was filming it, shouldn't he have been like, you know what, this is kind of dumb? Even my daughter, who saw it for the first time, she was like, this is really bad. She's 11.
Yeah, there were lots of points within this movie where somebody should have been like, wait, let's just take a break and think about what we're doing. Like, did we need Eddie Brock, Mary Jane's career woes, or Gwen Stacy at all in this movie? They could have still left the symbiote and have him attached to Spider-Man. That way you have the themes of like your darker side, and then have him carry the black suit over to a 4th movie and then tell the Eddie Brock and Venom storyline.
Yeah, that would have been perfect. Why not do that? I have to say, I was looking forward to this film so much back when I saw trailers for it like in 2007. Just seeing Spider-Man in his black suit like swinging through like an underground subway system tackling Sandman. There's no doubt in my mind that this was going to be like a really, really great, awesome movie.
Yeah, in the trailers for the film, they even showed the scene where Peter's removing the symbiote using the bell tower at the church. And I was like, holy shit, that's like straight from the comics. I've always wanted to see that. And actually, you know what? It was a great scene in the movie, but it was a little bit deceptive when you include it in the trailer and assume that every scene is going to be like that. There were some good things about this movie. I will say that I did enjoy the movie's action. You know, the Green Goblin fight, the crane scene, the 2 Sandman fights, the fist fight with Harry, and the final battle with all of them and Venom. I thought they were actually pretty spectacular, even if the special effects were a little bit inconsistent.
Well, they're definitely dated now, I would say. But at the time, yeah, they were top notch.
Yeah, and that is probably one of the few good things you can say about the movie, you know, other than like the performances, which were consistently good throughout the franchise. Thematically, though, the movie wasn't quite as strong as its predecessors. You know, the first Spider-Man movie was about newfound power and the responsibility that comes with it, and the second movie was about the sacrifice that comes with the responsibility. But in addition to sacrifice, great responsibility can also bring great personal reward, as Peter learned at the end of Spider-Man 2. Thematically, though, after that film, it's hard to know where to take the character, as he pretty much completed his full hero's journey at the end of Spider-Man 2. So this movie decided to explore the concept of choice. Not the choice to be the hero like in Spider-Man 2, but rather the choice between your dark side and good side when confronted with your own personal demons. Peter chose to embrace, then abandon his darker side, represented by the symbiote. Harry chose vengeance, then chose to be there in the end for his friend. In concept, the movie works well thematically, but in practice it all got lost in the chaos of all the plot lines. Sandman felt like he had no choice, I guess, but to commit crimes to help his daughter. But his choice at the end to team with Venom to kill Spider-Man felt flimsy because Sandman didn't identify himself as a killer.
No, it made no sense whatsoever. Like, the money he got earlier on in the film, like, what did he ever end up doing with that? What happened with his daughter? We have no idea. And that's how inconsequential his arc really was to the film.
Yeah. And then you have Eddie Brock, who chose to be a lying douche and chose to be evil as Venom because he enjoyed it.
It's fun?
Yeah. The movie was fairly weak in the connective thread of its ideas, which exacerbated its already disjointed feel. But let's go ahead and talk more about their arcs in our character breakdown. Let's start off talking about Peter Parker, aka Spider-Man, who is played by Tobey Maguire. Now, I do feel conflicted about Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man because while I love his character, his plights, and his growth throughout the series, because really they're second to none, I feel his acting can sometimes be so weird and very much unlike the Peter Parker that I know from the comics. Because of that, and I know everyone has their favorite Spider-Man actor, but Tobey is actually my least favorite because he's the least comic accurate.
Really?
Controversial? What do you think?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I know quite a few people who say that Tobey is the best Spider-Man. I don't know if it's just because it's the one that they grew up with as children, but, there were way more cheers in my theater when they saw Tobey Maguire back in the role than Andrew Garfield.
Nostalgia only takes me so far when it comes to comparisons to the comics.
Well, what are you talking about here, like web shooters?
I mean, in terms of personality. You know, Peter Parker was socially awkward.
I feel like he's the most socially awkward. I feel like he's the best representation of that. Because Tom Holland, he has friends, and Andrew Garfield, he's like a skateboarding punk, How is Tobey Maguire not the best representation of that?
I think for Sam Raimi's franchise, it was definitely Sam Raimi's version of Peter Parker, which was further away from what I know than either Tom Holland or Andrew Garfield. If you watch a movie like Into the Spider-Verse, which I thought was a great representation of the adult Peter Parker and his mannerisms and whatnot, especially as Peter Parker got out of high school and into college and came more into his own socially.
So you think Tobey Maguire is too, childish?
I wouldn't say he's childish, but I would say he really maintained the awkward factor.
Especially during those dance numbers.
Yeah. I mean, despite everything I said, I do think that Tobey did well in this movie, despite the script that made him dance and do finger guns and cry like a blubbering baby at least 5 times. What actor besides him could pull that off in this film? Now, I mentioned before that Spider-Man 2 had Peter at the end of his hero's journey. So in Spider-Man 3, they kind of had to have him backtrack a bit and introduce some new conflict, and they did so in the form of his ego. Now, traditionally, it's always raining shit for Peter Parker. He struggles in every aspect of his life. It's part of what makes the character. But at the beginning of this movie, things are going better for Peter Parker than they ever have. This new state of things goes to his head, and he begins to lose his empathy as a person, and he gets a little cocky. He kisses another girl. He goes too headstrong into battle with Sandman and gets his ass beat. Then he gets the Venom suit, which worsens his negative aspects, and he allegedly kills Sandman, blows up Harry Osborn with a pumpkin bomb, and slaps MJ around. At the end of this arc, after he ditches the symbiote, Peter is fully humbled and ready to start again as a good person.
Yeah, in prior films, it was always about him being down on the dumps because of his bad luck. It was always external. In this film, it was all about hitting rock bottom internally as a character.
Now, I'm not sure if because of this, the movie surmises that Peter actually needs to go through his traditional hardships to actually be a decent person, but it is an interesting thought.
And I could totally see that. I think if things always were going for him, he would be like a cocky, arrogant asshole, kind of like Tony Stark. But one of the reasons you relate to him is that he is a nice, kind of humbled person and relatable because he goes through hardships.
Yeah, to me, I tend to see the character as a good person, whether things are going well or not. So perhaps, this is just the lesson that he had to learn in this movie. And from here on out, anytime things go well for him, he won't devolve into a state of apathy and arrogance.
Well, I mean, Spider-Man's always kind of been a bully in the comics, at least, I think, which is kind of ironic because he was always kind of like, Clark Kent, very nerdy. He was bullied himself. But when he put on this mask, it kind of gave him this other persona where he became like the aggressor and where he was able to like tease and make fun and stuff like that. So I think it was kind of apt in a way in this film that they kind of made him out to be a jerk because there's always been sort of shades of that in the comics.
That's true. That's a really good point, actually. And if the movie chose to explore that specifically, I do gotta hand it to him because it's not something that's often discussed.
It's the Superman complex, right? That's what Fredrum Wortham coined, that term.
Yeah, but he was a dick.
That's true. Fuck that guy. Totally.
Let's go ahead and move on to Mary Jane Watson, who is played by Kirsten Dunst. Now, as bad as things went for Peter in Spider-Man 2, I think things went pretty much the same for Mary Jane in Spider-Man 3. She got fired from her dream job. Her unempathetic boyfriend kissed another girl. She kissed another guy who forced her to dump Peter. She got slapped, and she got kidnapped again. Like, she really went through the emotional ringer in this movie. Except for her, there was no cathartic moment like Peter had at the end of Spider-Man 2. In fact, the end of this movie was quite somber and kind of a downer, really. I wasn't even really sure if Mary Jane and Peter even got back together, so it was nice to hear Tobey say it in Spider-Man No Way Home that they were together and to get that closure for these two characters.
Well, he said it was complicated.
Yeah, well, either that means they're together and they're still, working on it, or it means, he's stalking her and they're not together.
That's creepy. You're right. Yeah, I do feel really bad for Mary Jane in this film, even why she got fired. I thought Kirsten Dunst did an amazing job singing at the very beginning of this film.
And that was her singing, too.
Yeah. So for them to write into the movie that she did a terrible job, I felt just meta sympathy for the actress,
Yeah, I think Kirsten Dunst did a great job in this movie.
Yeah, honestly, I think this might have been her best performance out of any of the Spider-Man films, because I thought her performance earlier was always kind of cheesy, but here I thought her demeanor was great. I thought her performance was great.
It was a little more real, for sure.
Yeah.
But in regards to Peter and MJ's relationship in this movie, I think it sucks because audiences waited 2 whole fucking movies to see Peter Parker and Mary Jane hook up, right? I don't think anybody wanted to see a movie where their relationship was just, real crappy and uncommunicative. I wanted to see them being loving and supporting of each other despite all of their mutual struggles. That's what I wanted to see in Spider-Man 3.
Yeah, at the end of Spider-Man 2, everyone was just kind of cheering because he finally got the girl. And I don't get why they would end part 3 the way they did. It's no one's going to be walking out of that theater cheering for this ending, They're
going to be like, oh God, relationships suck.
This whole story from the very beginning of Spider-Man 1 was supposed to be about a girl, about Peter and his relationship with Mary Jane Watson. They fucked it all up.
You're right. Yep, that actually may have a bigger role into why this movie is so unsatisfying than I probably even realize. Let's go ahead and move on to Harry Osborn, a.k.a. Green Goblin, played by James Franco. Now, Spider-Man 3 finally delivered on the promise that was given at the end of Spider-Man 1 when Harry said that Spider-Man would pay for his father's death. And in the second movie, when he learned that Peter was Spider-Man, and then he found his dad's gear behind the mirror, I was like, oh shit, Spider-Man 3 is going to be intense. And then we saw what happened, and I'll admit I was a little underwhelmed. Now, don't get me wrong, I do like the fight between Peter and Harry in this movie.
You mean the first one where they're going through the cityscape?
Well, I like both of them, but I'll say that the whole arc was really put on the back burner, like everything was in this movie. It was all on the back burner.
It's all undercooked.
Yeah, the fact that Harry bumped his head and got amnesia right away was a little anticlimactic to me.
I don't get why they did that. That makes no sense to me.
Yeah. They needed to bide their time, I guess. And I'll admit things got a little bit more dark and interesting when he got his memory back, leading up to their second fight, which was awesome. The fact that it all culminated in Harry's redemption when he fought alongside Peter was nice, but it was also kind of undercut by the fact that the reason Harry became good again was because his butler came out of nowhere with the revelation that Norman was impaled by his glider. Like,
I
what
still
the
remember
fuck?
rolling my eyes in the theater when that scene came up. I was like, really? Fucking dude, you waited all this time to tell him?
Yeah, that butler sucked, man. Frickin' Bernard. I think that was his name.
Yeah.
He should be fired, like, on the spot.
Seriously, like, why didn't Harry do that? Be like, you knew this whole time? You're just telling me now? Get the fuck out of my house.
James Franco's performance in this role for this movie, I thought was almost a little bit caricature-y from what came before. Although, he was kind of a character in Spider-Man 2 where he was just, 100% hell-bent on getting back as Spider-Man. But in this one, it was bizarre because he lost his memory, and he became happy-go-lucky James Franco.
Yeah. It's like, when was Harry Osborn ever that happy?
Yeah,
Never?
all smiles and everything.
Yeah.
I thought it was interesting when he asked Bernard if he had any girlfriends, which kind of gave some insight into the character because I think a standard person would say, do I have a girlfriend? I don't know, it just made me not like him. I don't know. It was like he's insinuating that he already knows he's a player or something. I don't know. Just didn't gel with me. Let's go ahead and move on to Flint Marko, a.k.a. Sandman, who is played by Thomas Hayden Church. I liked him in this role. I'm not hating on Thomas Hayden. I think he did a fine job here. I really thought the character design was pretty much flawless.
Yeah.
As flawless as you can get. It's just straight out of the comics.
Yeah, I think if he would have had the film to himself, he would have knocked it out of the park. I think he would have been just as noteworthy as Willem Dafoe and Alfred Molina, the villains who came prior in earlier films.
I agree with that.
The guy is a really good actor, and he did so much with what little screen time he had. Like, that looked like true emotion.
Yeah, absolutely. And because he was shortchanged here, I really like how they brought him back for No Way Home. It was really cool to see him again. Because he's such a badass with an awesome power set that's really cinematic.
Yeah, for sure.
I did think it was a little cheap of this movie to give him a sick daughter in an attempt to humanize him and add depth, considering it was barely part of the story. We got no resolution to it. And that's not from the comics.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
Ugh. I didn't like the fact that they also tied him into Spider-Man's origin. I thought that was cheap, too.
Yeah. To try to make him relevant in a story where he's really not,
Right.
Again, I 100% agree with you. I think if he was the sole villain, or maybe even just him and Harry Osborn, he would have been just as memorable as Green Goblin and Doc Ock. Let's move on to Eddie Brock, a.k.a. Venom, who is played by Topher Grace. I'll say it off the bat. I like Topher Grace. I don't like this movie's characterization of Eddie. I get that they were trying to present him as Peter Parker's dark reflection, not only through the parallels of making him a rival photographer with an alleged girlfriend he planned on proposing to, but also by casting an actor that could have played Peter Parker himself. And if you ever watched that 70s show or anything else Topher Grace was in around the time, I think he would have made a great Spider-Man.
Yeah, totally.
And maybe that's why I didn't buy him as the shrewd, angry, conflicted, yet malicious character that Eddie Brock is supposed to be. Eddie Brock here was too jokey, too non-threatening, and too just unbelievable as Venom.
I hated skinny Venom. It's just weird looking.
Well, I mean, I like the Venom creature's design, though. Like when Topher's face was covered up and he was like this snarling raptor-like creature, I thought that was pretty great.
I liked the symbiote, like the way it moved, kind of like a spider, like out of a meteorite and stuff like that. I thought that was really well done.
Yeah, great special effects with the symbiote in this movie. And it's interesting that Spider-Man No Way Home seemed to imply that the Clintar hive mind kind of allowed the Clintar alien that was in this movie to share a consciousness with the Venom that's in the Tom Hardy franchise right now. It just kind of hits a little bit differently when you watch it again. The last character we want to talk about is Gwen Stacy, played by Bryce Dallas Howard. She was a character who was in this movie. And the only reason I bring her up in this character breakdown is because she was substantial in the comics and in the next iteration of the franchise, portrayed by Emma Stone. In this movie, Gwen Stacy was merely included for romantic tension between Peter Parker and Mary Jane, though I think that was completely unnecessary.
Yeah, she should not have been in this film.
No. Bryce Dallas Howard did look the part, though. She looked a lot like Gwen Stacy from the comics. But that's all the characters worth noting in the character breakdown. Let's go ahead and move into the story highlights. Now, the movie starts off with your classic Spider-Man opening credits, which felt a little bit more disjointed considering they went with this like symbiotic fluid background for most of the credits. But then all of a sudden you'd have like sand fly in. And like when the sand was mixing with the Venom symbiote, it just looked like you would just get mud or something like that. I don't know how to explain it. The credits felt as incongruent as the movie itself. You know what else was pretty discordant was the music, because while Danny Elfman wrote the theme for Spider-Man, it was Christopher Young that actually took over music composition for this film. So you had Danny Elfman's music going, and then all of a sudden you would have Christopher Young come in, and it almost seemed like a duet between composers when they're singing different songs, you know?
I thought Danny Elfman scored this film. And, you know, when I was watching this movie for this review, I remember thinking, this has got to be the worst Danny Elfman score I've ever heard in my life.
That guy is off his game.
Yeah, totally. I was like, he just phoned it in for the third one.
From the credits, we get into the story where Peter Parker finds himself in a new life situation with an adoring public as Spider-Man and in a loving relationship with Broadway star Mary Jane. While celebrating their successes in the park, a symbiote falls to Earth on a meteorite and follows Peter home.
Which was so random.
Oh yeah, it's like, oh, I guess aliens exist now.
Right?
Meanwhile, Harry Osborn takes the Goblin Serum and escaped convict Flint Marko visits his daughter. I thought the scene with Flint and his ex-wife or whatever was a little awkward. The dialogue was strange because she was like, I live in the presence of great truth. And I'm like, what are you talking about, lady? You know? Right. Like, just speak like a normal person. God.
Who wrote your dialogue?
Peter tells Aunt May he's going to propose to MJ, and on his way home, he's attacked by Harry. Harry hits his head and gets amnesia.
This whole scene was like so much more unintelligible than I remember.
Really?
Like, it's just like CGI chaos.
Especially when they're going through the alley, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think the alleyway was rendered quite to what it should have been to be believable. It totally looked like these guys were just like bouncing around on a green screen. I remember watching the scene in the theaters, and the moment when Harry hit his head on the pipe, people around me started cracking up like it was some kind of joke. But then all of a sudden he like fucking dies and Peter Parker has to revive him, and you know, shit really got serious in an instant.
I did like how they used the wedding ring to add like another layer of tension to that scene. I thought that was really well done.
Oh yeah, the engagement ring. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was like, oh my god.
Is he gonna get it? Is he gonna propose?
Flint Marko falls into a particle accelerator while on the run from the police, and he is transformed into Sandman. I definitely think that the scene when he becomes Sandman and is like forming his new body is just poetic. I think it's the best scene in the whole movie.
Yeah, it's really well done.
MJ is hurt by a bad newspaper review of hers, and Spider-Man saves classmate Gwen Stacy from a construction crane gone haywire that knocked her off a skyscraper. I could watch Spider-Man save people from falling all day long. Those scenes are always the best.
I don't know. This one had a little bit too much debris, I feel like. I'm pretty sure someone down there on the streets died from all these freaking huge chunks of concrete and stuff.
Oh, no doubt. For sure. I like how we never even saw what happened to the crane. Like, it totally destroyed that floor, and then he saved Gwen Stacy, landed her safely to the ground, and it was all over. Nobody else needed saving, you know?
I did think it was weird how they introduced Eddie Brock. Did you think that too?
Yeah, he kind of just like showed up in the scene.
Yeah, literally.
He's like, hey, is that Gwen? And it was like, wait, first of all, who are you?
Who the hell are you?
Yeah. And Captain Stacy, played by James Cromwell, which was great casting, by the way. He pretty much said the exact same thing. He's like, who the hell are you? Eddie Brock and Peter Parker compete over a staff photo position at the Daily Bugle, and MJ is fired from her Broadway show. What did you think of the Daily Bugle scenes in this movie?
I thought they were great as always. You know, J.K. Simmons, it was like born to play J. Jonah Jameson. I thought it was really funny the way like Betty Brant like kept buzzing the intercom anytime he was like trying to do something that was just irritating the shit out of him, but you knew he couldn't do anything about it because of his blood pressure.
Yeah.
Comedic gold.
I think we were missing some of that comedic stuff from the version of the character in No Way Home.
Yeah, totally.
Spider-Man is given the key to the city by Gwen Stacy, and he kisses her in front of Mary Jane.
Like, why would he do that?
Yeah, what was he thinking? What an idiot.
He knew Mary Jane was there. And it kind of does like go into the whole thread of Aunt May telling him that he needs to think of his wife ahead of himself and how he's clearly not doing that.
Sandman interrupts the event and tries to rob an armored car. Spider-Man attacks him, but the villain escapes. I thought this was a pretty cool scene going through the city.
Can Sandman fly like that?
Yeah, he kind of like turns into dust and floats away. Peter Parker tries to propose to MJ at a restaurant, but he's a douche and she leaves.
It did kind of seem that, like, Gwen Stacy had no concept of boundaries either.
Yeah.
Because, like, she was, like, rubbing his shoulder and stuff, and he's clearly in front of his girlfriend. Like, they're at dinner. It's like, what are you doing, Gwen?
Get out of here, Gwen. But also, he was like, I know how you feel. Spider-Man showing up in all the papers, and he's kind of like a hot Halloween item. You know, it's like, dude, shut up and let her talk. Something. They both have communication issues, though. I'll say, Mary Jane and Peter Parker. It's not going to work out.
Why didn't she just tell him that she got fired?
She should have. I think she was building to it, and he just wouldn't stop. But also, she should have, actually fucking told him. They need therapy. Later, Peter and Aunt May learn at the police station that Flint Marko was Uncle Ben's real killer, which I think they should have introduced that concept way earlier in this movie, because it's like, oh, now we learn why this Flint Marko guy is relevant to the story.
Right, exactly.
And we said it's a cheap way to try to make him relevant, but still, it would have made him more interesting to us early on.
You almost could have kicked off, like, the second act of the film with that news.
Yeah. Well, they kind of do that, though, don't they?
Do they? Like, does the second act really start, like, this late in the film?
I think it actually starts when he gets the Venom symbiote.
No, that's way too late.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's too late. And yet the movie is still introducing new concepts like this late in the game.
That's horrible. Horrible writing.
Well, yeah, a big part of this movie's major flaw is that plotlines would only be picked up like 20 minutes at a time. Sandman is missing out of a big chunk of this movie, and by the time he showed up again, I was like, oh, that's right, he's in this movie. Yeah. Oh, that's right, the symbiote thing. Oh, that's right, Harry Osborn, The whole movie felt like that.
Ugh.
Peter brushes off MJ's offer for emotional support and falls asleep while listening to the police blotter. It's then that the Venom symbiote attaches to him. It's just been hanging out in his apartment this whole time. But I like the face that it kind of has as it's crawling over him.
Yeah, like classic Raimi horror. It was well done.
And I like the design of the black suit Spider-Man. It's really just his entire costume covered in black, but with the raised look that the Tobey Maguire suit has always had, I think it just looks awesome. I'm not sure the black look would be as effective on something real smooth like Tom Holland's suit.
True.
Peter goes out and beats the shit out of Sandman, turning him into mud with a sewer pipe. Then he goes full emo and tells Aunt May that Flint Marko is dead. MJ gets a job at a jazz bar and goes to hang out with Harry when they kiss. Harry gets his memory back and forces MJ to break up with Peter, telling him that he and MJ are having an affair. Cold-blooded.
That was a pretty, evil scheme on behalf of Harry Osborn. Even, James Franco's face, it was kind of scary.
Yeah. If I were Peter, I would have beat the shit out of him. I wouldn't have been like, I don't believe you, and then left. I'd have been like, it's fucking go time, bro.
Flip the table.
Yeah. Catch me outside. But they do throw down later back at Harry's place, and Peter wins by blowing Harry up with a pumpkin bomb. I thought this was a pretty good fight.
The fight was good. I still don't understand why they would choose to turn Harry into Two-Face.
Well, we don't know that till later, but yeah, you're absolutely right. Extremely brutal on behalf of Peter Parker throwing that bomb, But things got pretty intense in that fight. Especially when Peter was like, your dad hated you. I'm like, holy shit. I mean, I know shit's going down, but damn, this is kind of hard to watch.
Well, not even that. He was even like, are you going to cry now?
Yeah. Oh, God.
Uncomfortable.
Meanwhile, Eddie Brock deceives the Daily Bugle with a doctored photo of Spider-Man, and Peter exposes him before going full-on finger guns bro across the city. People around him are just like, ugh, what are you doing?
Yeah.
They're so turned off by his finger guns and his, sliding and clapping and spinning and stuff.
I've seen defenses of this film, apologetics, saying that, this is his version of evil. And I'm kind of like, I don't know, that didn't happen in the cartoon, I don't think he would just, start randomly humping the air,
Yeah, I definitely don't remember that from the cartoon. Peter takes Gwen Stacy to MJ's jazz club where he calls a waitress hot legs, plays piano, dances on the bar, unleashes a gust of wind by taking off his jacket, and backhands MJ.
I think that was pretty excessive.
Yeah.
I mean, he needed to hit rock bottom, but I don't get why MJ would go back to him at the end of the film after he hit her like that.
I mean, he could possibly blame it on the symbiote. I don't know. I don't know if that would fly.
You'd have to tell her about it. And we should have seen that.
Yeah. Peter removes the symbiote suit at a church bell tower where it falls onto Eddie Brock. I thought this was an awesome scene, as I mentioned earlier. I thought it was pretty faithful to the comics, and the special effects were really good. I was actually really excited to see what would happen once Eddie Brock got the symbiote, because it just looked so monstery and scary, you know? But then you see him with his Topher Grace voice crawling on the wall, talking to Sandman, talking about how they should team up to kill Spider-Man. And I was like, oh, this maybe isn't as cool as I thought it was going to be.
No.
So Venom and Sandman team up, they kidnap Mary Jane, and Peter sees a television news report that MJ has been taken hostage. And those anchors were annoying, man. Peter asks Harry for help before heading to the scene, and Harry's butler reveals to him that Norman was killed by the Green Goblin glider, which again, what the fuck? Get the fuck out of here, Bernard. Pack your shit.
Get out of here, Bernard.
Peter finds MJ dangling above a construction site in a taxi. He fights Venom and Sandman, and they team up to nearly kill him before Harry joins the fight in his goblin gear. Now, Venom and Sandman are kind of like an unconventional type of duo. I can't think offhand of any time they've teamed up in the comics, but they seem to do pretty well here. You know, they're both stronger than Spider-Man, and one of them can hold him down while the other one just pummels him. I actually was surprised in the theaters when all of a sudden I saw that pumpkin bomb fly into Sandman's ear.
I don't know if I was quite ready for Harry's redemption at that point. And honestly, I was still kind of, throughout this whole film, thrown by his choice of design for his Green Goblin suit. Like the snowboard, the mask, I hated all of it.
It was during the extreme sports phase, you know?
I guess.
They had to make him like the Green Goblin, but he had to be cooler.
But why?
Because he's hip, because he's with it. He snowboards, bro.
Dumb. He even had snowboarding goggles on.
Yeah, he did. It was for merchandising, you know.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Peter and Harry fight Venom and Sandman. Harry uses his missiles to destroy Sandman, then gets impaled trying to protect Peter from Venom, which I thought was actually pretty hardcore. I was shocked. I did not see that coming. Harry's whole death was pretty brutal. He went out even worse than his dad did.
Yeah, totally.
Peter uses the sonic vibrations from steel poles to restrain Venom and blows him up with a pumpkin bomb. The special effects on that Clintar alien, though, again, were phenomenal. Sandman appears after Venom's death and apologizes for accidentally killing Uncle Ben. Peter forgives him.
He just lets Sandman go away. Like, despite committing all those crimes, he's just like, yeah, go ahead. You're free.
Yeah.
You're free.
Well, he didn't mean it, man. He did it for his daughter, right? I don't know if Peter knew that, but...
No, he didn't.
We knew that. I guess that makes it okay. Peter and MJ say goodbye to Harry as he dies, and they attend his funeral. At the very end, Peter visits MJ at the jazz club where she works. He reaches out to her, and they slow dance.
Really bad choice for an ending. Horrible choice.
I remember walking out of this one going, maybe they're not going to make it after all. But that's the end of the movie. I think overall you guys have a pretty good idea of my thoughts on this film. It had very few redeeming qualities other than the acting and the action and the special effects. But even the special effects were kind of inconsistent. I don't think it's quite as bad as the level of Fantastic or like Batman 66. Both movies we gave 2 stars, if I remember correctly. I do think Spider-Man 3 is more on the same level of Green Lantern with Ryan Reynolds. And like Green Lantern, I would rate Spider-Man 3 2.5 stars. There are things to enjoy. You know, if it's on, I'll definitely watch the action scenes. But there's just so much wrong with the story and other elements that it's never quite fully enjoyable.
I just feel like really bad for all of the actors involved in this film because you know they tried. And I unfortunately can't give them, an A for effort. I think there were just some really bad decisions made with this film on behalf of the director, on behalf of the studio, and the producers and the writers. So, yeah, I think a rating of 2.5 is apt. It's an F, which I definitely think this movie deserves.
50%, yeah.
Right.
Not the absolute worst superhero movie out there, but does not get a passing grade.
No.
Close to a D, not quite there.
Wasn't the 4th film supposed to have, Anne Hathaway as Black Cat or something like that?
No, it was going to be Anne Hathaway as Vulturess. Vulture was going to be the bad guy, but it was going to be a gender-swapped version of the character.
Fucking glad that didn't happen.
Yeah. Ultimately, we got a reboot with the Amazing Spider-Man films, which weren't a huge improvement over this 3rd installment. And, the rest is history. We got Spider-Man Homecoming, Far From Home, and the glorious film that was No Way Home. Which, you know what? If the best thing that could be said about Spider-Man 3 is that it led to some awesome moments in No Way Home, at least we got this movie for a reason. It took 14 years for us to see that reason, but it was there.
There you go. That does it for this review. Let us know what you thought about the movie by writing to us at dynamicduelpodcast@gmail.com or by visiting us on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter. You can find links to all of our accounts by checking out our show notes or visiting our website, dynamicduel.com.
And on our site, you could also find a link to our Patreon page, where we offer bonus content, including bonus episodes and duels, monthly live movie watch-alongs, collectible pin sets, and access to our Discord server. Check it out right after this episode. Our lowest tier is only $2 a month.
And as a tie-in to this review, our next episode will be a Red Tornado versus Sandman duel. You know, we've kind of played up on the elemental fire versus ice angle in a few duel episodes prior, like Human Torch versus Killer Frost or Green Lantern versus Iceman. This time, we're pitting the element of air against the element of earth and see who's going to come out atop.
It's going to be Earth. Sandman. Place your bets now.
Wind!
Captain Planet.
There you go.
But that does it for this episode, guys. We want to give a big thanks to our executive producers, John Speas, Ken Johnson, Jace Crump, John Starosky, Zachary Hepburn, Mitchell Phipps, Dustyn Balcom, Salvador Hernandez-Contreras Jr., and Levi Yeaton for helping make this podcast possible. And we'll talk to you guys next week.
Up and away.
True believers.